This week's episode is one that you are not going to want to miss because it is with Scott Belsky, who is the founder and CEO of Behance, but also the chief product officer at Adobe. We talk about so many incredible things that if you are in the startup area of your business, this is definitely one that you're going to want to tune in because he really touches on things that you don't want to lose sight of. Yes, it's about the money, but more importantly, it's about the product that you're creating for your client and not diluting your focus in what's most important to your clients. Today, we have an amazing guest joining us, one who has made a significant impact in the world of entrepreneurship, innovation, and creativity. He's a visionary leader and thinker who has been at the forefront of driving change and pushing boundaries for over a decade. Our guest today is Scott Belsky, the founder and CEO of Behance, the world's leading platform for creative professionals. In addition to his role at Behance, Scott is currently serving as the Chief Product Officer at Adobe. He's also a published author with his books Making Ideas Happen and The Messy Middle, and becoming a must-read for entrepreneurs and creatives alike. So without further ado, please welcome Scott to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. There's so many things that we're going to talk about today, so let's dive right into it. Can you tell us about your experience about starting and growing your business and the challenges that you faced along the way?
Yeah, sure. Behance was I was going to say it was unusual, but maybe it's more ordinary these days. We were bootstrapped for 5 years, and which caused us to be very, very resourceful, in how we managed our time and energy and capital. And, there were many times where that we were always a couple of months away from not making payroll, and it really caused us to refactor constantly how we were building a business. So 5 years as a bootstrap company, almost 2 years as a venture-backed company, before we ended up being acquired in late of 2012. And that was the journey, and I learned a lot from both phases of that journey.
I love that you mentioned that because I feel like there's so many entrepreneurs these days that are like, oh, if I don't make millions of dollars within the first, 2 years, then I'm a complete failure. But it's totally okay. Like all of us out there are bootstrapping, we're making it work, and our businesses are so valuable to our consumers, no matter what value they are. But I love that you mentioned that because I feel like there's so many people, there's so many things we see on social media nowadays that it's refreshing to see that you're just like the rest of us.
I think that's right. And I also think that you can I do think that companies should have a mission, right? And they should have a specific objective that they're angling for. But I think you can increasingly be mission centric, but medium agnostic. And what I mean by that is you can accomplish that mission in many different ways. For us, we started hosting a conference where people bought tickets, and we had sponsors, and we also had organizational products that were helping creatives get organized, and we also had this network that we were building. So we actually had multiple ways to help organize the creative world, which was our mission. That was sort of medium agnostic. We did it in all kinds of different creative ways, and that was how we bootstrapped ourselves. That was kind of how we served the customer and ensure that we were able to pay the bills. And of course, by just surviving long enough, we were building a brand and a base that then, became a bigger business.
Oh, I'm so glad that you brought that up because I was going to ask you, how do you approach product development and management for the business?
Well, so product development and management, I really see as two very different things. On the management side first, and then we'll get into product a little bit. I very much subscribe to never ask someone to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. And so from, cleaning up the trash in the office to any other sort of task, community management or, finance or whatever the case may be, I often tried to do something myself for a little bit before asking someone else to do it. So I would always have empathy with what I was asking them to do. And I think that, also, I was always trying to hire people that were both practitioners and managers. I was trying to make sure that we weren't just building layers, but rather having a more flat organization, for as long as we could. And so we can certainly talk more about management. On a product side, I'm a very design first product leader. I like to see things. I believe a prototype is worth 100 meetings. It's one thing to sit around a table thinking, what should we build? And well, I don't know. And then debating it versus just looking at pixels, looking at a flow of what your customer is experiencing, and then really anchoring the debate on that. And so I was always working with designers. My co-founder was a designer, and we were always design first as a product organization.
We need to talk about your leadership philosophy, because I feel like that is something that so many of us small business owners forget about. We forget that it's a really good idea to do those things, potentially hire someone to do them afterwards, but you having a baseline knowledge of that. So how did you implement that in your businesses?
In terms of leadership principles,
Mm-hmm.
well, I was always thinking about, I think people want to know when they work for you, what your expectations are of them. And I over the years would iterate a set of leadership principles, for my team that would help them understand how I would ultimately be measuring, their impact. And one of them, for example, always was around customer centricity, and that we would do things that optimize for customer value, even if it was at the expense of the purity of the technology or and even the profit of the company. Like, ultimately, the long-term benefit, of the company is clear if you can make customers really happy. And so anchoring around customer centricity was always part of it. Empowering designers, I thought was a very important part of the culture, and understanding what that meant. I would also push leaders to not just be managers, but also leaders. So what I mean by that is, you're not just building a road, you're also flag planting. So you're planting a flag. This is where we need to be 2 years from now, and we're going to build the road to get there. And I think sometimes you can make the mistake of hiring managers who are really just road builders, and they can't articulate to their team exactly where we're going. Articulation, narrative, also hugely important. I always liken a small business, a journey that all of us are on, to driving your team across country with the windows blacked out and everyone sitting in the back seat. And no one knows where they are. No one knows if they're making progress. And if you narrate the journey to the people that you're driving in this car, they will withstand the journey. Otherwise, they will go stir crazy, right? And they won't be able to manage. And I do believe one of the greatest competitive advantages of the best startups is simply sticking together long enough to figure it out.
Absolutely. Now, what are some insights because I know with your businesses, like, the technology is changing so rapidly. What are insights that you developed through your businesses about how do we keep up with all this stuff?
Yeah, in terms of technology,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great question. I personally, the answer is I'm a writer. I like to write a lot, and I find that it's my incubation time. It's the way that I take observations that I have over a dinner with other startup founders, or in a meeting about artificial intelligence with the engineering team, or whatever the case may be. I try to take these learnings and I actually try to write them. I have a newsletter that I call Implications, and it's a forcing function for me to constantly, every month, take the things that I'm observing and think about what are the implications of these things. It's a great exercise. It also helps build my own network, right? Because of the people who are subscribing to Implications. But then also, it's a way for me to internalize what this means for our business. And so you have to have like this system, right? You have to have a constant system of considering and internally debating what you're seeing, to think about how it should impact what you're trying to do in the world.
I love that. Now, if there is someone listening and they are contemplating starting a brand new business or a startup, what is your experience with fundraising and building relationships with investors to make those businesses happen?
Well, a couple things. On the investing side, I would first start by saying that financing is a tactic, but not a goal. I think that's the mistake that a lot of startups think, is that our objective is to try to raise money. And therefore, we're going to position ourselves, we're going to spend so much time on the things that will help us raise money, when in fact, that's not a good business. What's a good business is building something that your customers value. And if you are running in a non-economical way where you can't build customer value while staying solvent, then you've got bigger problems. And in the past era, you could throw capital at the problem, but in the new era, that won't work anymore. And that's why I like to say resourcefulness is more valuable than resources. And so I do encourage teams to think about themselves, if not as a bootstrap organization, at least as a very tight, what's the minimum amount of capital, and what are we going to try to prove with that small amount of capital that gives us entrance to the next stage of our growth. And whether or not we need new capital, we will see, right? So I think that's important. I also think it's really important to always be telling your story. Every time you tell your story, you polish it like a stone and it becomes better. Also, every time you tell your story, you are planting seeds that of people who will then, if they're interested in your story, will start to watch and tune into your progress, and could inevitably be employees or customers or investors. And so you always want to do that. Now, some entrepreneurs say, oh, but I'm not ready to tell my story, or I'm worried someone's going to steal my idea. My answer is, if your idea is so easily stolen, it wasn't a good and defensible idea to begin with, nor did you have something unique in making that idea happen that someone else wouldn't have, to just copy you quickly. And the benefits outweigh the costs. The more places you spread this, this seed of your story, the more possibilities can grow in all sorts of unexpected places.
I love that, because that's so true. There's so many people out there that are like, hey, I have this great thing, but I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to share it. And you're like, no, that's how you get it out there, is to share it even more and make it so incredible that it's not easily stolen. One question that, when you were saying that it popped into my mind was, how do you measure and track the success of Behance or Adobe? Because I feel like that's a big thing that people are like, how do I even measure this?
Well, every team does ask themselves, right, what are our measures of success? And I think the common mistake there is to have too many measures. Because if you have too many measures, your team is scrambling around, and some measures might be up and some measures might be down, and no one really knows whether we're doing well or we're not doing well. I think the challenge for a great leader is to find the one or two metrics that matter most to her organization, and then to really drive everything around those two. And it takes some thought to think about what those two are, because there's downstream effects, like for example, if I only care about monthly active usage, first of all, is that the right metric, or is it repeat monthly active usage? Because if it's just monthly active usage, if I have tons of people come in every month, but none of them ever retain, that number is going to look great, even though the product sucks. So, it should probably be repeat monthly active usage. And if it's repeat monthly active usage, but it's not a financial metric, is that sufficient? At some stages you say, yeah, we just want repeat monthly active usage, because that means that customers are getting so much value out of our product that they're coming back. And if we can just get that number to be great this year, we can certainly have a whole year of monetization efforts next year, But this is the type of debate I think that every team needs to have to really determine the metric that matters most.
Well, and knowing too that can shift and change. So you may start out with something, and then as things go along,
Yeah,
you got to be flexible to fix it, right?
absolutely. And in my book, The Messy Middle, I talk about Ben Silverman, who was the founder and CEO of Pinterest. And every year he used to have a new mantra for his team. It was the year of monetization, or it was the year of going international, or it was the year of doing things for 4 categories in Pinterest that he think mattered most. And this narrative was really what drove the entire company to set their own goals and reallocate their resources. And what's interesting is that even with a company of that magnitude, of course, many things matter every year, right? But the leader having narrative around one central theme really helps people knock something out of the park and reach escape velocity with some of the efforts that they have underway.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because I feel like there's so many entrepreneurs that really lose focus because there's so many things that are happening. I mean, there's so many times that every day is like dodgeball. You're just trying to stay afloat, keep things moving, keep things going forward. So what are some other strategies or tactics that you've used to scale your businesses?
Well, I think that let's talk about a couple things, one on the leadership side and then one on the product side. On the leadership side, on scale, uh, everyone always wants to grow. One of my cardinal rules in leadership is to be optimistic about the future, but pessimistic and pragmatic about the present. And what I mean by that is, always having your eye on where we should go, and really, getting everyone so excited about the possibilities, and yet always being very pragmatic about where we are. Look, we're not doing this. This is not growing fast enough. This is not working. And in some ways, every meeting, every conversation in your company should be like a optimistic, then pragmatic, and then optimistic again. Like that's the sort of sandwich of every interaction and conversation and discussion that you should have. And I think it's important because you can't grow a great company as a leader just being optimistic, nor just being pragmatic or pessimistic about the present. Like you really do have to have the balance. And I encourage the listeners to think about themselves as a leader, who embraces that. I think that will do well for you as you grow. As a product organization, it's two things. Number one is don't just fix what's broken. Like that's another mistake I think that a lot of product teams make. Also, fix what works. What I mean by that is you become exceptional and you grow and become a category leader by emphasizing the things that you're doing really well and making them better. So whatever is working for your organization, getting customers in the door, making them happy, spreading the word, like those are the things you should probably be investing more in, because those are the distinguishing aspects of your business. And just because they're working doesn't mean you should then focus on something that you're weak on. You should actually emphasize the things that you're strong on. So I think that's number one. And then number two is to remember that people seldom, and we're talking about scale, right? And we're talking about hopefully efficient scale, which means people helping spread the product word of mouth as opposed to just paid marketing, which is very expensive. Remember that people don't often talk about a product doing what they expected it to do. They talk about a product doing what they didn't expect. And the same goes for a restaurant, by the way. If you go to a restaurant, it's a good meal. Are you going to like rave to a friend? Or if you were at the restaurant and suddenly everyone started dancing and confetti went out, will that be what you talk about, right? So I think this goes for both a product or a service or an experience. If you want it to grow organically, you have to optimize for things that people didn't expect. Now, this is very hard because you have a long laundry list of things you have to do to be successful as a product. And the things that I'm talking about are things that won't necessarily be at the top. I mean, think about Tesla, for example. Tesla famously has a $0 marketing budget. And people often rave about all these Easter eggs in the car, and like you do this 3 times to the shift thing, and then the rainbow road comes on the dashboard, and like all these fun little things. And these are the things that the car does that people didn't expect and therefore talk about, and then everyone wants to try a Tesla. And so I oftentimes think about the products and engineering people in the room who are debating whether to do this thing that's for car performance or this thing that's for car safety. And I'm sure there's an infinite list of those things, or Rainbow Road, and like, how did they make the case that that was important enough to make the cut? And I think it's because that team recognizes what I said. People talk about a product doing what they didn't expect. And so I think that's one of the insights that I would share with all of you that, is worth thinking about in your own business.
Absolutely. Well, 2 things that I took away from that was like, again, with the focus, like don't dilute the focus, but keeping it fun. I mean, what's more fun than a rainbow road? I mean, I didn't even know that existed, but it's like you see all these different things on, social media. I mean, the graveyard one is one that caught my attention. I'm like, what? This is crazy. So there's all sorts of different things that even if you think that your business is typical, like a restaurant, like, you know, so many things that you're like, oh, my business is not that exciting. There's so many different ways that we can really wow our customers, and to not forget about that, because we oftentimes do.
I think that's right. And that's why I always like to remind product leaders that we're designing for people. You know, whether you're building a enterprise product or a consumer product or something in the middle, we have to remember, like, people, you know, in our initial experience with any product or service, in our initial experience, like the first 30 seconds, we are lazy, vain, and selfish. Like, we don't have any desire to learn something new. We don't have time. You know, we don't have faith in the product because we think every product's out there to take advantage of us. We we want to make sure that we get a quick return on a short amount of time that we're giving up in our lives from something new. And so how do we make sure that we, you know, keep in mind we're building for people. People want to be surprised and delighted, and and they're very protective of their time.
Oh my gosh, we have talked about so many good things today, so many things that any entrepreneur, whatever phase of business that they're in, can take away. One last question for you. What is one piece of advice that you would share with an aspiring entrepreneur or business leader?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, it all comes down to empathy. And that's why building for yourself is such a competitive advantage, because people are often able to be empathetic with their own needs. It's a real superpower to be empathetic with the needs of others. Being shoulder to shoulder and understanding what someone's really suffering from and with is a superpower. A lot of teams build something for a customer in mind, but they just fail to get as close to the customer as possible and really like feel. And what you might find is that what the actual need is, you know, is slightly off from what you think the solution is. And that's why I like to say that empathy is more important than passion when it comes to building a product or business, because you can be very passionate about something and build something that ends up being 30 degrees off of what the customer actually needs, and your business will fail. And I've seen that many, many times. So empathy with what the customer's suffering from will, you know, outperform passion for the solution any day, in my opinion.
So important to remember. Now, where can people get signed up for your newsletter? Where can they find your books at? Because there's so many amazing things that we've talked about today, but there's so much amplified in your books.
Well, I appreciate that. No, I invite folks to subscribe. I have a free newsletter at implications.com. So it's easy to find. I am at Scott Belsky on Twitter. So at Scott Belsky. And the two books I have out there, one's The Messy Middle from a couple of years ago, and then Making Ideas Happen from a few years before that.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.